Hello, welcome to Science Chomp. Today we're going to be talking about groundwater. I've divided this up into a series of questions to make it slightly easier to understand. So let's start off with what actually it is. So groundwater is water that lies below the Earth's surface, and it's our most abundant freshwater supply. So the water that we drink is fresh water. We can't just access it from the ocean because that's salt water. Okay? So that's what it actually is. So how does it get there? Now, all water starts off in the ocean, and then what happens is the sun causes it to evaporate, turns into a cloud, and then it rains onto the ground. The ground has lots and lots of little holes called pores, and the water infiltrates into the ground, into rocks called aquifers. So that's how it gets there. Now, what happens when it gets there is it slowly moves downhill, and it does eventually end up returning back to the surface through springs and wetlands, and eventually it does return back to the ocean where the whole cycle begins again. Okay, so it's like the water cycle basically. Okay, so how does it move? I've already answered it here. Groundwater moves downhill. Okay, how far underground is it? Well, it depends where you are. It can be at the surface, so that would be wetlands, things like swamps, marshes, bogs. They have the water very, very close to the surface, sometimes slightly above it, but around that kind of level. Sometimes it could be a few meters down, but if you're in a desert area, it could be tens to hundreds of meters below the surface of the ground. Okay? We call that the saturated zone. Basically, a saturated zone is, that's basically where all the holes within the ground, all the holes within the rock itself is completely and utterly filled with water, and the upper boundary of that is called the water table. Okay? So the water table, it depends, like I said, it could be at the surface, it could be a few meters below, it could be tens to hundreds of meters below the surface of the ground. Okay? How does it get to our home? So what happens with groundwater is it is extracted, so you can make a well, and you can pump it to what's called a water tower. And then from the water tower, it gets distributed to all the homes. Usually water towers are placed very high, so on top of hills and things. So you let gravity pull it downwards into people's homes. Okay? And finally it says, how do humans affect it, as in affect the water table? Well, wherever you've got civilization, you have pollution issues, because the way we do things, the way we've got industry and farming and all that kind of stuff, is basically we produce lots of chemicals, and these can seep into the ground and affect our groundwater. So examples would be, for example, farmers. They use things like pesticides, fertilizers, all that kind of stuff for their crops. And they spray their crops, and all the extra chemicals seep into the groundwater. Now, I'm sure none of us want to drink pesticides, but pesticides can end up in groundwater. Other things could be things like sewage, okay? Especially if you're in a third world country and you have those like pit lavatories, the water from your waste products will end up into the groundwater, and then you'd be drinking someone's pee and liquid poo. Something to think about. Other things, okay, nuclear reactors. Of course, if you're having nuclear waste, you've got to store that underground, and what they do is they encase it in glass so it doesn't get into the groundwater. But if, say, the glass was to crack, you can have radioactivity leaking into the groundwater, and that would be bad. And that's pretty much it for groundwater. I've covered the basics. Watch the first part of the video as well, the groundwater keywords, and it should give you an idea of what you need to know. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.